Welcome back to 2-Minute Tech Tuesdays. My name is Thijs, I'm the technical evangelist at Varnish Software, and in this week's episode I'll talk about prefetching, which is a concept of proactively fetching content from the server that wasn't requested by the client, knowing that that client will eventually need the content. I'll explain what that means and how you can do it in Varnish in 2 minutes, give or take, so I'll put that on the timer and tell you all about it. Prefetching is usually instructed by the application that has prior knowledge of the required resources, and it is initiated through a link response header or a link HTML tag. In the case of Varnish, content can be stored in cache before the content is requested by the client, which improves the hit rate, the speed, and the user experience. Imagine that the client sends a request for the homepage of a website to Varnish. Varnish fetches that from the origin and stores the output in the cache while inspecting the output for a potential link header that does prefetching. In this case, we'll prefetch main.css. As we deliver the requested output to the client, we perform an internal sub-request for the main.css file. When Varnish doesn't have it stored in cache, it will fetch that content from the origin and then store it, so that eventually when the client needs the main.css resource, Varnish already has it in the cache. Prefetching can be done using vmod HTTP, which is a Varnish enterprise module that performs HTTP calls in VCL. This is what the VCL code looks like. We start with importing the vmod, and then setting the URL of Varnish for the internal sub-request by leveraging the http.varnish_URL function. As the backend responds with the output, we check whether or not it contains a link header matching the prefetching pattern. If it does, we extract the URL from the header and store it in xlink, which we then use to populate the URL with the actual URL we need for the internal sub-request. Now that we have a URL, we can perform an HTTP call. So we need to initialize the HTTP client, copy in the request headers and inject the URL. And through send and finish, we perform a fire and forget request that asynchronously sends an internal sub request to the origin without blocking this transaction. Prefetching can also happen within an online video context where OTT video platforms also leverage HTTP. Imagine that a video player uses the HLS protocol and loads an M3U8 playlist file. This playlist contains all the streams that need to be loaded to create that online video stream experience. Because these streams are loaded sequentially, it's quite easy to guess what the URL of the next stream will be. And that's how we can perform prefetching, while requesting one segment, already figuring out what the next will be. Here's our VCL code, and again we start off by importing the vmod. And then we intercept requests where the URL matches our streaming pattern. If it does, we initialize the HTTP client and use a function called http.prefetchNextURL to guess what the next URL will be. And again we perform a fire and forget, hoping that the content eventually will be stored in cache without blocking this transaction. That was it for this week. Prefetching is a pretty clever trick to define an HTTP call within your VCL file to eventually store content that you know that later on in the process will be loaded. So it's not really there to protect the origin, but it's all about improving the quality of experience for the user and making sure that content that it will need later is already stored in the cache. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week for more tech presented to you in 2 minutes or less.